Let me ask you this question. Fundamentally, conservative Republicans, are you going to pay for it?
I think
every state that requires voter ID,
I'll do it.
pays for the voter ID.
It's yes or no.
If you will say yes and get rid of mail voting, yes.
So you're going to pay for it?
If you'll get rid of mail voting, yes.
No, not if.
Yeah.
There's no if.
30 days after.
Why do the goalposts keep moving for Republicans?
Because they lose.
Republicans.
No, it's not. It's because we're trying to take fraud to zero.
Let me finish my question, because it seems to me that at all these different junctures, Republicans have been talking about voter fraud. They got Help America Vote. Some states have voter ID. Georgia, the state that Trump thinks that he won when he lost, it has a voter ID law on the books.
In today's video, Bakari Sellers and Abby Phillip destroy Brad Todd on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. On one side, Brad Todd argues that stricter voter ID laws and proof of citizenship requirements are necessary to protect election integrity. But Bakari Sellers and Abby Phillip push back hard, pointing out something that often gets lost in these conversations: the actual evidence. After decades of investigations, audits, and court cases, there's still no proof of widespread voter fraud in US elections. So let's dive in and watch how Bakari Sellers and Abby Phillip shut down Brad Todd on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Voter fraud.
I know he is.
He says it is rampant. Yeah. I'm asking the President of the United States to prove it. They have asked all the states, they've gotten it from a dozen states or so, to give them their voter rolls. Why have they not been able to prove that rampant fraud?
So those voter roll disputes are cleaning millions of people off the voter rolls. And I'm lumping
show me the
in
proof of fraud. That's all I'm asking. Where's the fraud?
Because names on those voter rolls are voted.
There is one truth about voter fraud in the United States, and that is that it does not exist to any degree of consequence anywhere in this country. And I know that for a fact because the Republican Party has proved it to me. For decades, Republicans have searched high and low in every corner of this country with massive budgets, the power of subpoena, a presidential commission, the Department of Justice, legislative committees, state legislatures, academics, think tanks, conservative media. They have looked everywhere. The Heritage Foundation has a fraud tracker. They've looked at elections dating back to the 1970s. That's billions of votes, not every single vote, but billions of votes. And if you I looked at it the other day, 1,620 cases of proven fraud. Now, I think it is fair to say that this is a solution in search of a problem.
Wait a minute. How much fraud is okay? I would say zero.
It depends on if you're going to disenfranchise Americans who have the right to vote.
How much fraud's okay? What's an acceptable number?
So they tried this in Kansas, and they looked at, and they found a handful, I think less than 20.
So that's an acceptable number of fraud in your mind?
They would have, if that had gone through, they would have disenfranchised 33,000.
No one's disenfranchised.
33,000.
That's not true. Every person who's eligible to vote can register and can vote. It's the easiest country to vote in the world.
Yes, but
why is it crazy to think that you have to
Can I tell you? That's not because this is, and this is what drives me nuts. This is not a voter ID bill. Stop saying that. That's not true.
Are you for voter ID, though?
Voter ID, fine. We're here. This is not voter ID.
It's an 80-20 issue. It's an 80-20 issue.
Can we talk about what the issue is in the SAVE Act?
Right.
The issue is proving your citizenship. Voter ID is what they did in Indiana back in 2004, 2006. Voter ID is when you show up, you have to present an ID which proves your residency in the state. What people have done throughout the states is say that, look, if you don't have a driver's license, you can use a utility bill. Right. You can use a college bill, college ID.
That's not voter ID.
That actually is voter ID.
No, a photo ID issued by the government. You should have to have one of those.
But you know what's crazy? What we're talking about is disenfranchising.
It's not disenfranchising.
Can I finish?
Anyone can get it.
There are only 50% of Americans don't have a valid birth certificate or passport. That is what's required under the SAVE Act.
No,
that's not voter ID. What
let me tell you a story.
It's the same as real ID and then a whole bunch of other stuff.
After the 2020 election alone, there were recounts, audits, and court cases across multiple states. Dozens of lawsuits were filed challenging the results. Judges, including many appointed by Republican presidents, threw those cases out because the evidence simply wasn't there. That's not a partisan talking point. That's the legal record. And even before 2020, this wasn't some untouched issue. The Bush administration's Department of Justice spent years investigating voter fraud claims in the early 2000s. They struggled to find cases significant enough to prosecute. Later, the Trump administration created a presidential election commission specifically to investigate fraud in the 2016 election. That commission quietly dissolved after failing to produce proof of widespread fraud. Then you have the numbers. Studies from organizations like the Brennan Center for Justice consistently find voter fraud rates somewhere between 0.0003% and 0.0025% of ballots cast. In other words, statistically almost non-existent. That doesn't mean fraud never happens, it does occasionally, but the scale is nowhere near what's often claimed in political rhetoric. What Terry and Bakari are pointing toward and what gets lost in these debates is the difference between voter ID laws and proof of citizenship laws like the SAVE Act. Those are not the same thing. Many states already require ID when you vote. The SAVE Act goes further by requiring documents like passports or birth certificates to prove citizenship when registering. And that's where the concern about disenfranchisement comes in, because access to those documents isn't universal. Millions of Americans don't have passports. Birth certificates can be difficult to obtain, especially for people born in rural areas. Older Americans whose records weren't digitized, or women whose names changed after marriage.
When you try and get your ID, you need 2 proofs of citizenship. Most of the time, or proofs of identification. Most of the time, it is a birth certificate.
Right.
And if you have a birth certificate, then you can use a utility bill. Neither one of those have your photo on it, I want to point out. If you don't have a birth certificate, you need like 5 forms of ID, which sometimes can be challenging. I'm telling you, as someone who had a grandmother who did not have her birth certificate, she was born in Panama City, Florida, okay? My mom had to call the Board of Elections in Panama City, Florida, to try and get proof of her birth. She is living, she is breathing, she is a black woman, she has lived nowhere else than Youngstown. Well, that's not true, and a couple other cities, but primarily in Youngstown, Ohio. Do you know how they said that she could prove her ID? A family Bible. Now, you want to tell me a family Bible is how we are? That's the law in a state like Florida. Voter ID laws do raise the threshold and make it harder. There is a significant amount of Americans that don't have passports because they've never left the country. Passports are expensive. So if you want to pay for everyone to get a passport, great. Make it easy like that. Or they don't have access to their birth certificate, and it is not easy actually
You should get access to your birth certificate.
Yes,
Word
but
to the wise.
what I'm
Everyone in
saying
America
is
should
it is
do the work
not
to get that.
easy to get access to your birth certificate because you need other forms of ID to get access to your birth certificate, but you can't get your birth certificate if you don't have those IDs, and you can't get those IDs if you don't have your birth certificate.
Isn't this
It's
also
circular.
just about the fact that Trump lost the last election and hasn't?
I don't
And
think
he's
Ken
mad.
believes that he lost in 2020. Ken, do you believe he lost in 2020?
Yep. They swore Joe Biden in, saw the whole thing. Yeah.
But did Joe Biden win rightfully? Because you mentioned this thing about Hunter Biden's laptop, and you went in this rabbit hole.
Zuck-
He won, but I think Zuckerbucks is wrongfully. And I think the censorship that took place with Joe Biden's full knowledge on the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't illegal, but it was cheating.
Okay. The president
Legally
continues.
stolen.
The president continues to believe that he won an election that he lost, and now is trying to fashion American policy around that falsehood. Is that really how we should be operating in this country? That he wants to outlaw mail-in ballots, even though Republicans utilize them and win when they exist, just because he thinks wrongly that he won an election that he lost?
I think he lawfully lost in 2020. I don't think we ought to have mail-in ballots. I do think you ought to have voter ID. And I don't think the Congress ought to do it. I think the states ought to do it. But I think every state in the country should have voter ID and no mail-in ballots. That is the only right way to run an election that has no fraud. And I don't see why it's even an issue. And the American people don't either. About 80% of Americans think we ought to have voter ID in every state with a photograph issued by the state, not a utility bill. That's not voter ID. You could steal that out of the apartment mailroom. You need a voter
You
ID.
do realize that's the
from
law
government,
in
from
certain
the-
states,
I
right?
do.
You
I
just
do.
said pass it down
I
to
do.
states, and
I
that
do.
is the
No,
law.
every state. No,
part
every
of the
state.
Help America Vote Act.
Every state.
I know.
24
yeah,
years ago.
and
it's inadequate.
Every state should have a government-issued photo ID as a requirement to show up to vote. Every
So are
time
you going
you know what else
to? Let me
is
ask
gonna
you
say
this
that?
question. Let me ask you this question. Fundamentally, conservative Republicans, are you going to pay for it?
I think
Every
it's-
state that
Are you?
requires
It's
voter
literally-
ID
I'll do it. I'll tell
pays
you what.
for the
I will-
voter
It's,
ID.
it's yes or no.
If you
Are
will
you
say,
gonna pay
if you will
for it?
say yes
Then
and
the
get rid of
answer is
mail
yes.
voting, yes.
So you're going to pay for it?
If you'll get rid of mail voting, yes.
No, not
No, if
Yeah.
There's no if.
Saying everyone should just get an ID sounds simple, but when you dig into the data, the reality is a lot messier. According to the Brennan Center and other voting rights studies, millions of Americans don't have ready access to documents like passports or certified birth certificates. Passports alone cost over $100 once you factor in application fees and photos, and roughly 2/3 of Americans don't even have one. That's not because they're trying to avoid identification. It's because they've never needed to travel internationally, and birth certificates aren't always easy to retrieve either. Many older Americans, particularly those born in rural areas or in the segregated South, were born at home and never had formal birth records filed. This was documented in multiple court cases when states tried stricter proof of citizenship requirements. In Kansas, for example, a law requiring documentary proof of citizenship ended up blocking over 30,000 eligible voters from registering before courts struck it down. Judges ruled the burden on legitimate voters was far greater than the evidence of fraud. That's another piece that often gets skipped in these debates: the scale of the problem. Numerous investigations, including those led by Republican administrations, have searched for widespread voter fraud for decades. The numbers consistently come back extremely small relative to the billions of ballots cast. That doesn't mean fraud never happens, but the data simply doesn't support the idea that it's common enough to reshape the entire voting system around it. Then there's the mail-in ballot argument. Mail voting has actually been used by both parties for years. States like Utah, which lean Republican, run almost entirely by mail and have done so successfully for a long time. Military members overseas rely on absentee ballots to participate in elections. Eliminating mail voting altogether would affect those voters too.
Yo, it is if.
No,
It is if.
if you want people to have, there's no if. Do you want people to have
It's
ID
a grand
or no?
bargain.
Do you want people to have an ID or not?
Oh, free ID. Yeah, free ID, of course.
So you want
Absolutely.
the state's going to pay for it?
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
state's going to pay for it?
Absolutely. They do in Tennessee.
But you know,
okay.
But you
that's
know
right.
what also is in the SAVE Act is like when people motor voter bill, right? When
You
people
can
go
assist them?
and it's actually trying to remove that. So when people actually go to get a photo ID from a state agency, and then could also easily register to vote because they've already proven who they are because they have a photo ID. In that bill, it is taking that assistance at the DMV out. So it is, again, putting another unnecessary barrier.
You can still register at DMV.
And you should be able to register the same day too, right, Ken?
No, absolutely
vote?
not. Absolutely not.
Why
30
not?
days out. 30 days out.
Why do the goalposts keep moving for Republicans?
Because they
on this?
lose.
Republicans.
No, it's not. It's because we're trying to take fraud
here,
to
look,
zero.
Let me finish my question, because it seems to me that at all these different junctures, Republicans have been talking about voter fraud. They got Help America Vote. Some states have voter ID. Georgia, the state that Trump thinks that he won when he lost, it has a voter ID law on the books. Even those things are not sufficient, even though the prevalence of fraud has not increased. So why does what you guys are asking for keep changing and keep shifting?
So I don't think that it does. I think attention has been brought to this after 2020 on the right. The left has been engaged in pursuing its goals in the process since 2004. And the right only really got into the game since 2020.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that since 2020, again, since Trump lost an election that he rightfully lost, that Republicans are suddenly more fixated on changing the rules of voting.
Cleaning up those areas.
Why?
That need it.
Because
but
why?
this isn't.
If he lost and he rightfully lost,
I'm sorry if
then
we're on your
why?
turf after 20 years, but up until 2020, Democrats owned this space, and Republicans weren't even participating in it. And I think an awful
what
lot of the
space?
pushback, election reform of any kind. So I work.
Republicans
I work
dominate
with
voter suppression.
Republicans don't perform voter suppression.
There's no such thing.
Okay. Let me just
Look,
And there's no fraud either.
I do want to
Sure.
understand what you're saying, Ken.
So
Finish your
let's
thought.
set, if it's possible for anybody, set Donald Trump aside. And look, I work in the election reform space. I've always had the opinion that if you pulled 100 random Americans off the street and put them in a hotel and asked them to design an election system, and you did it 1,000 times, they'd come awfully close to one another. And by the way, they'd all have voter ID, and they'd all make
With a
you prove you're a
photograph.
citizen, because it is overwhelmingly popular.
It'd also make
across
election
the
day a
aisle.
day off.
Yes.
They do
No,
same-
you're right.
They
do
would
same
do
day
same
voter
day
registration.
voter
No, I don't think so.
They don't do
Yeah.
30-day
You know what
early
else they
voting.
would? You
Why
know what else
not?
they would
Why
probably
wouldn't they do
do?
same day?
They would
Because you
probably
have to be able
also
to know
have a
who's on the
system.
file
It's
so you can
It's
challenge someone who's
2026.
not lawfully
It's
registered.
2026.
You have to have it 30 days
Americans, I
after.
think,
Get tech.
probably believe there
And you
should
also
be a
wanna be able to
system
check
right now in which the government, who knows who is a citizen and who is not, who is eligible to vote and who is not, the government actually does its job and checks who's eligible to
So-
vote in the moment that someone is trying to vote.
First voter ID, then stricter ID, then proof of citizenship, then eliminating mail voting. That's the pattern Ashley and Abby are pointing toward. The goalposts keep shifting even though the underlying evidence of widespread fraud hasn't changed. Take mail voting, for example. It's been used for decades. States like Utah and Colorado, including heavily Republican areas, rely heavily on vote-by-mail systems and consistently report secure elections. Military voters overseas also depend on absentee ballots. Eliminating mail voting entirely would affect those voters too. Then there's the DMV issue they raised. The motor voter law passed in the 1990s actually increased registration because it allowed people to register while getting a driver's license or state ID. Studies have shown that it significantly boosted participation without increasing fraud. Removing that assistance would make registration harder for people who already proved their identity to the state. And Ken's idea that the government should automatically know who's eligible to vote sounds simple, but in practice, the US doesn't have a single national citizenship database. Election records, immigration records, and state databases are all separate systems. That's why election administration is handled primarily at the state level. Building a real-time national eligibility system would require a massive new federal database, something many conservatives have historically opposed because of privacy concerns. Another piece that gets overlooked is turnout. The US already ranks relatively low among developed democracies in voter participation. Policies that add more procedural hurdles tend to lower turnout further, especially among younger voters, the elderly, and people who move frequently. That's been shown in multiple academic studies. So the real tension here isn't whether election security matters. Everyone agrees it does. The question is whether the solutions being proposed actually match the size of the problem.